managers who undertake the intervention experience. And then finally, we're going to end the webinar by explaining how you can get involved, what we can offer you, and what we ask of those people who do get involved in this really interesting and hopefully unique and innovative research project. There'll be plenty of time to ask questions. Because we've got so many people on the call today, we've done this in a webinar format. So unfortunately, we can't hear your voices, which is a shame. But if you do have questions as we go through, you can use the Q&A button, and please ask any questions in there, and we will pick those up as we go through and at the end. And if there are any questions that we aren't able to answer within our time, then we will get back to you when we after the webinar, when we'll send you some further information regarding the project and a recording of this webinar itself. And I should say we are recording the webinar, but as it's a webinar, none of your identities will be revealed, etc. So I hope people are okay with that. Also, there's the chat function. If you have any comments, or if you want to communicate with anybody else within the webinar, then please do that. We'll also be posting some things in the chat, so please keep an eye on the chat as we go through the next hour or so. And particularly at the end, when we're going to be posting an important link in terms of how you can get involved in the project. In addition to that, we've enabled sort of live transcript and subtitling. You'll see on the bottom of your screen there is a button there which you can enable it for yourself. So anybody who would like to take advantage of that facility can do so by pressing the live transcript button. I think, actually, by way of introduction, I think that's all we need to cover. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Jill Dix, who's Head of Workplace Policy for the Advisory Conciliation Arbitration Service, ACAS, and she's just going to explain sort of the rationale for ACAS being involved in supporting the Skilled Managers project. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you so much, Richard, and good morning to everyone. Huge numbers of people, and people still coming in. For those who missed it, the whole session will be recorded, so you can play catch up later. Just an intro to ACAS. Many of you will know the Arbitration Conciliation Advisory Service, who are here to make working life better for everyone in Britain, and that is our mission, and one that we live up to. We know that when the problems come up at work that we all have to deal with, they can be small and they can be significant problems. And that's why we're committed to helping employers manage problems at work in the most efficient and effective way they can. And it's really our prioritization to help employers do this. And that's why I'm really delighted to be with my colleagues here today that I've been working with for such a long time from Sheffield and Westminster, where we've been researching the most effective ways to handle conflict at work, and in particular to look at the role of line managers. So much rests with the line manager, we know, and so many of the problems we all know as line managers can actually be very, very challenging. And I'm really, really pleased to see the research and piloting of this work has come together, funded by the ESRC in a brand new programme led by my colleagues here. And all I want to do really is hand to them and to thank them for all their work. The point of the session is to share more of the information about this training course with you. But as Richard has said, the great news, this is an opportunity to also get involved. So I'm going to hand over now and just hope you can sit back and enjoy the session, participate in the Q&A, and I think there may be even a few little questionnaires for people that Richard and Paul and Peter have lined up. So thanks very much, Richard.
Thanks so much, Jill. I'm now going to hand over to Professor Paul Latreille from the University of Sheffield, and he's going to talk a little bit about the background to Skilled Managers and explain a little bit of what it is. Paul.
Thanks very much, Richard. So just really, first of all, the very simplest question is just what is Skilled Managers? And in essence, it's really an online training intervention designed to enhance managers' conflict confidence and competence. What I think makes it distinctive, and unlike most other training programs, is that, as Jill's indicated, this is at the core of a research project funded by the Economic and Social Research Council and it uses a cutting-edge randomized controlled trial with treatment and control groups, so managers who get the training and other managers who don't, at least initially, to assess the impact of the training. And that's assessing the impact of the training on the managers themselves, but ultimately on employee engagement and productivity. It's important to stress that while it's designed for all managers, skilled managers is especially relevant for first line managers. Those are the people, as Richard indicated, who are really operating at the sharp end. And this project has been developed by a team. So it's a team based at the universities of Westminster and Sheffield and in partnership with ACAS. And I do want to emphasize early on in today's presentation that this is very much a team effort. So while you'll see the first 4 of the team presenting today, others on that team are really important. So as well as Peter, Richard and myself and Jill, there is also Fatima and Frankie who are behind the scenes today on today's call. They're managing the Q&A and chat. And we've also got Alex, who's a quants expert, who will do much of the data crunching in due course. So why this focus on managers, and in particular line managers? Why are their skills so important? Well, the key is that it's line managers who shape individual employee experiences at work, as data from a variety of sources confirms. I'm sure we can all recall that a great manager in our own experience who had really good people skills, who made working for them a pleasure, who communicated well, made us feel valued and supported, and who dealt with issues, particularly between colleagues, effectively and fairly when they arose. But of course, not all managers are like that. And one of the circumstances where they really get tested is in conflict situations. And it's worth emphasizing, as I'm sure you'll be aware, that conflict in the workplace is common. The CIPD evidence that suggests around a third of employees experience either a one-off incident or a protracted conflict episode each year. And the impacts of that, if it's poorly managed, can be really pervasive. So, for example, there's CIPD evidence that suggests that 4 in 10 workers who experience conflict report reduced motivation. And as you can see on the slide, 56% of those who experience conflict report stress, anxiety, and depression. Research undertaken by Richard and Peter and published in an ACAS report reveals that conflict at work is really costly. It costs organisations an average of more than £1,000 per employee every year. And that cost varies dramatically according to when situations are tackled. As you might expect and perhaps recognise from your own experience, early resolution of issues, and in particular when conflict is resolved by managers, costs far less than when conflict doesn't get resolved and ends in resignation. So as you can see from the slide, if you take into account hiring and replacement costs, reduced productivity while people are learning the ropes, etc., conflict can result in a resignation of up to £30,000 in cost. That's a really huge expense for organisations. So line managers, if they can resolve conflict, are really important. But of course, if all this seems really obvious, then what's the problem? Why are we worried about this? Why don't we just make sure managers have the right stuff? Well, there are 4 reasons why we think that it's important that we take line manager training and we look at whether they've got the right skills. First up, managers are often still recruited and indeed promoted because they have strong technical skills and expertise. They're good at the day job rather than because they have good interpersonal skills and are able to get the best out of the people that they manage. Indeed, oftentimes we refer to those people as accidental managers. And we all probably know people in our organisations who fit that bill, who fit that description. And when we talk to HR managers, it's certainly a phenomenon they recognise, along with the fact that managers often lack self-awareness about whether they're good at these things. There's something called the Kruger-Dunning effect, that if you're less skilled, you're often unaware of being less skilled. And that's exactly what we think probably applies in this situation. Of course, we could train individuals to be better managers. But one of the challenges that has been around in recent years is that work's become increasingly intensified. And that really limits the time managers have in the face of pressure of operational demands to undertake the sort of training that historically has been provided. Even before COVID, getting a group of managers in a room for a day or even half a day of face-to-face training was a challenge. And since COVID, that's been compounded in any number of ways, but including by the increased prevalence of hybrid working. So people just aren't working in the same spaces a lot of the time. And that itself, of course, raises additional issues in the task of managing people. Thirdly, much of the training that's offered to managers emphasizes leadership. So things like setting the vision, generating ideas, shaping the culture, more strategic and kind of change level activities. And a lot of the training emphasizes leadership rather than the more perhaps mundane skills of day-to-day line management. So organizing, planning, problem solving on a recurrent basis, a much more operational exercise where you're not making changes necessarily, but you're just getting the day job done. And that includes managing people. And in our experience, what induction does exist for line managers typically deals more with processes, such as how to complete certain tasks, rather than the softer skills, such as how to communicate effectively, motivate the people you work with and manage, and how to manage and resolve conflict. And lastly, conventional training often doesn't reach the people that it needs to. In organizations that we're familiar with, training is often a reward for more senior managers rather than busy frontline managers. And those managers, as I've argued, a day away from the workplace simply often isn't feasible and might indeed be seen as a cost to the organization. So skilled managers is our way of trying to tackle some of these issues, offering a new approach to key people training skills for busy managers. It's designed to help them become both more effective and confident in this critical area of their work. And I'm now going to hand back to Richard, who's going to do a show and tell of the product that we've developed.
Thanks, Paul. That's fantastic. So Paul's really set out in very sort of rich terms what we think is the problem, and that's very much based on the research that all of us have been doing over the past sort of 10 to 15 years, really focusing on this issue of managerial confidence and capability. And so what we were sort of tasked with when we started this project was trying to develop an offering, a training intervention that we felt might deal with some of those challenges. We started off pre-pandemic with a fairly conventional starting point. However, as the pandemic struck, we sort of pivoted to develop an online training intervention. And what I'm going to do in the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes is give you a little bit of an insight into what that training looks like and why we think it's a slightly different approach and one which we think can benefit your organizations and organizations more generally. You'll notice on the slide there's a video playing, and that's going to run through some of the training that and some of the images from the training that your managers, if they took part in this project, would be able to access. And I'll talk to that in a little bit more detail at the moment. What's very, very clear to us is that we believe that the skills that managers really need are those to manage conflict. Now, quite a lot of people don't like that word conflict, but the skills to manage conflict also underpin the development of positive relationships at work. So these are skills like good communication, they're skills like negotiation. And so if we give managers the skills to manage the difficult issues, actually, we believe they'll develop more positive relationships, which will prevent conflicts in the first place. So it's not just about containing and resolving conflict, it's also about preventing conflict. We also think, going back to Paul's comment about perhaps this over focus on leadership training in the past, is that there needs to be a real laser focus on core practical skills and techniques. So we really have stripped this right back to some of the techniques which we think that managers can take into the workplace very quickly after engaging with our intervention and use those to manage issues better and more effectively. Now, we're not trying to make every single manager into the world's perfect manager, but we're hoping to improve everybody. So for managers who are quite comfortable with communicating, with resolving conflict, with addressing difficult issues, we think our training will embed and enhance their skills. For those managers, and I have to say, I feel that my experience and our research suggests this is the majority, who are less confident with those issues, with dealing with those difficult issues, we believe that our training and our intervention is actually going to give them a starting point so they feel more confident to nip issues in the bud rather than avoiding them or sweeping them under the carpet. So there's a real focus on core practical skills and techniques. We've developed the training so that it is really engaging, so that it's quite, and it's also quite bite-sized, it's small, it's quick, it's flexible, and it's accessible. And that's bearing in mind the fact that, as Paul mentioned, managers, particularly line managers, are often under pressure. They have to hit their operational goals, particularly at the moment, with a whole range of issues about employee retention, recruitment and retention. Managers need information quickly, and therefore we have devised this intervention to fit that model. So in our view, what we've tried to do is develop something that's quite low burden in terms of the manager's time, but it's high impact. The training intervention and the toolkit, which I'm going to explain a little bit more detail in a second, can be accessed through conventional PC, a laptop, a tablet, but also somebody's smartphone. So a manager can go through our training course, and certainly they can access the toolkit using the smartphone. And the video that you've got on the slide there shows the smartphone view in terms of a manager going through some of our training and our toolkit. So it just gives you an idea of what a manager might see. Okay, if I could have the next slide. So what's actually in the course? So the intervention has two aspects. The first is a linear training course, and you can see the home page scrolling through here. We have core modules on effective communication, feedback and difficult conversations, intervention decision-making, and resolving conflict in your team. What you can see on the page at the moment is that we get every manager to do a quick conflict management questionnaire, so we get an idea of their conflict management style, and we give them some feedback at the end of the training on how that's changed. Managers can also book one-to-one conflict coaching. So that's a 15-minute video consultation with somebody like me, where they can talk about some of the issues they're dealing with in the workplace, and they can book that straight through the platform. The first module is about effective communication, and why people think that's quite basic. Our philosophy here is about giving managers the skills to conduct high quality conversations, because we believe that is the key thing in terms of preventing conflict, but also identifying potential problem issues. And you can see on the screen there's some of the material, short videos, real bite-sized accessible content, which so far in our trials managers have found really interesting and accessible. The second module looks at feedback and difficult conversations. And I'm sure many of you on the call will perhaps have some experience of this, and that where difficult conversations, something that managers particularly have sometimes have a little bit of an issue with and try to avoid. The third module looks at intervention decision-making. And that is particularly important in our view, because quite often managers are just not quite sure what to do. Do they resolve something informally, or do they go down a more formal route? And finally, our last module looks at resolving conflict in your team. So it's about how people resolve team-based conflicts where more than one person are involved. So overall, we're looking at preventing, containing, and resolving conflict in the workplace. On the video there, you can see here's some content from the intervention and decision-making module. And again, as you can see, we try to use sort of quite accessible infographics, short videos, and in a second, and you may have seen this previously, one of the things that we also use are things like simulations and quizzes to bring the training to life and to allow managers to practice some of the skills that they've developed through the course. And as I mentioned before, at the end of the training course, which we think normally takes between 2 and 3 hours for most managers to complete, we will provide them some feedback in terms of how their conflict management style has changed over time. Okay, so Peter, could you just move me on to the next slide? We also think it's really important to put that learning into practice. And so the second part of the intervention is an interactive toolkit for managers. And I'm just going to talk you through how this works. It's basically based on a range of common managerial dilemmas or managerial issues. And this can be accessed through a smartphone or tablet, as I mentioned before, where a manager can simply click on a particular issue and they might get a short 2-minute video or some very quick advice of key points that they need to think about in dealing with that particular situation. We try to provide some what we might call quick fixes or 5-minute pieces of advice if managers are really stretched for time, where we might give them a checklist to go through and work through, but also information to build a more longer term plan or strategy. This is the toolkit page you can see in front of you. So for example, a manager who wanted to tackle a persistent problem with repeated lateness and absence could click on that particular box and they will get that information and advice in front of them. We have integrated templates and tools that managers can work their way through. So for example, conversation planners, which they can download and print off. Again, a touch of a button through their phone, their PC, laptop, or their tablet. Okay. So you can see exactly how we use this. I'd also like to highlight on the video there, we have a search bar. So rather than just browsing through something, managers can type in a particular issue or a particular problem, hit the search button, and this will provide a variety of potential routes through which they can get some advice right at that minute, right into their phone or their tablet or their laptop. This one's about dealing with issues of personal hygiene, which is anybody who's gone on a difficult conversations course is that difficult conversation that most managers really, really dread. So we believe that this really starts to embed learning into practice. And really importantly, it has the potential to integrate into your existing HR system. So that one thing that we can do is that we can build your organizational processes into the toolkit so that managers can also click straight through into an organizational process or a procedure, or perhaps into your own templates and your own processes. So it's not only just simply what we're providing for your managers, but we can work with you to bespoke this to a certain extent so that actually it reflects your organizational context and the way in which you want your managers to handle some of these really difficult issues. Okay, next slide. So we're just going to give you a quick taste of some of the simulations and quizzes that we use, just to give you an idea about what your managers might actually do when they go through our training. And also this perhaps gives a little bit of a taste of a little bit of fun and gives you the opportunity to interact with us today. So this is drawn from our training. This is a situation where we're asking managers to make a whole range of decisions on a really challenging day. So we throw some difficult issues their way. Hopefully, I know a lot of the people on the call are HR practitioners, so you should find this really straightforward, but we'll see. So in this situation, we're saying that the manager has a one-to-one meeting with John, a member of staff who's very reliable but fairly reserved. At the meeting, John claims that one of his colleagues, Ellis, has been bullying him. How should you respond? So we're going to just put up a poll here and we're going to see what you think. How do you think John should respond, or how would you advise John to, how would you advise the manager to respond in this particular situation? So you can either tell John to make a formal complaint, discuss things with John and then do some informal fact finding, or tell John to raise his concerns with Ellis. You can vote away. Okay. I'm leaving it to my colleague in the control room to decide when to close this, but do you want to see what the results are so far, Anthony? Is that okay?
Yes, of course. Do you want me to stop the poll?
Yes, please.
Show the results?
Yes, please. Okay, so 94%, and I think that's what we would advise. So in this particular quiz, we say that that's as close as you get to a correct answer. Discuss things with John and then do some informal fact finding. So we emphasize this all the time with managers to do some informal fact finding. Okay, so could we close that poll, please, Anthony? And if we could go on to the next slide, Peter. So after discussing the situation with John, it appears that his working relationship with Ellis has been under strain for some time. John feels that Ellis is unfriendly and necessarily critical of his work and often makes sarcastic comments. We've all seen that in the workplace about his commitment to the job. He's never discussed this with Ellis. John doesn't want to make a formal complaint, but does want you to do something about the situation. Where do you go from here? So again, if you could have the next poll question, we're going to give you the opportunity of what would you do next? So how do you respond to this? Do you now conduct a formal investigation about this? Do you meet the other person to discuss the situation with a view to arranging a meeting with both John and Ellis to resolve the issue? Or do you tell John he needs to find a way of working with Ellis? If everybody could vote away. I'm literally going to give you 15 seconds to do this. Okay, Anthony, can we have the results? And again, meet Ellis, discuss the situation with a view to arranging a joint meeting. And again, that's one of the things that we recommend for managers to do. One of the things that some managers do is they pull people into a room right away and try and thrash out the issue, which nearly always ends up in some form of escalation. Okay, if we could close the poll and go on to the next one. So we want to also, one of the things we want managers to do is to actually realize that sometimes their decision making needs to change. So in this first slide, one of your key members of staff, Dan, turns up an hour late, which means that you have to cover some of his workload. You're very annoyed. He apologizes, explains he was unwell during the night. He's normally very reliable and his timekeeping is pretty good. How do you respond? Okay, so we're going to give you 4 options. Anthony, if you could flick up the next poll. Don't do anything. Find a time during after shift to have a quiet word. Check to see if there's a problem. But also make it clear that in future you need to know if he might be late due to illness. Find a time during after shift to have a quick word, just see if there's a problem, he's okay. Or make it clear it's not acceptable and that a repeat could result in more formal action. Okay. Okay, can we have the results for that one?
We need to give this a second. We still have a lot of votes coming in.
Okay, we'll give you 5 seconds, everybody. Sorry, I'm being very directive about this, but we need to get through a couple of things as well before the end of the session. And so a little bit more of a mixed bag there, but the importance there about having a quiet word. The problem is, for lots of managers, is that these problems don't go away with a quiet word. So we then go to the next stage of this little story. Okay, so could you close the poll, Anthony, and we have the next slide? Fantastic. So the problem is you now get a WhatsApp message to show that Dan actually, the previous night, was having a bit of a heavy session. And there's a message there, a picture there of him lying on a table in not a great state during the early hours. So how would you respond to having that information? Anthony, do you want to throw out the next poll? Do you just brush it off? Because particularly at the moment, people need to let off steam. Do you start a formal investigation at that point? Because you've now got some evidence that there's been some problematic behaviours here. Or do you invite Dan to meet with you to discuss the situation before deciding what to do next? Again, have a vote on that one. Let's see how we go. And most of you have got the right answer. One thing I would argue, if we had a room of inexperienced line managers here, This is the sort of thing that quite a lot of those line managers may well either avoid, hoping that it goes away, or alternatively, they might jump into a formal process because that provides a bit of safety. So again, we would be, throughout the course, we're looking for managers to have those conversations to discuss the situation. However, that doesn't always resolve it. So if I could close if you could close the poll, Anthony, and have the last slide. So this is the last one we're going to ask you to do. But so when you meet with Dan, he's really defensive, which is something managers really find problematic sometimes, that their reaction is going to be really angry if they raise an issue. He denies having been out the night before and claims he's just being made a bit of a scapegoat here. You try and explore things. However, he says that there are no problems, and what he does in his personal time is none of his business, and he storms out of the room. Okay. So what does the manager do now? So here's the last poll, and what do you do in response to Dan getting a bit defensive? Have a quiet word? Do you perhaps investigate the matter, put things on a bit more of a formal footing, or just give him a formal warning? Okay, I'll give everybody another 5-10 seconds. And again, a slightly more mixed response, which I think probably reflects different contexts. Okay, so a lot of people might give Dan that one more chance. Let's explore it a little bit more before we go down a formal route. But you've also got nearly a quarter of the people there, 86 people, saying, actually, there's time for a formal investigation. And one of the things that we try to help managers through is that decision-making about informal and formal, and actually support them in the fact that sometimes after you've tried to have those conversations, perhaps you do need to move things on a little bit in some issues, although always understanding that that depends on the context of the situation and of course the procedures in your own organization. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a taste of the intervention and the sort of ways in which we try to engage managers in developing their skills in managing some of those difficult issues. And I'm now going to hand over to Professor Peter Irwin, who's just going to take you through about what we know so far about the project that we've done to date, but also to set out what our offer is to you and give you the opportunity to get involved within the research as we go forward. Peter.
Thanks very much, Richard. So just to kind of emphasize, I'm sure some of you have picked up the fact that the work that Richard's been carrying out, and we've been working on the project, we've been developing the intervention with hundreds of managers and testing it across more than 20 organisations, just to make sure that we've got something that is attractive to organisations and has a chance of impacting the actual practice and ultimately the productivity and efficiency of organisations through the way that managers behave. So overwhelmingly, we've had positive feedback. I think actually this feedback still doesn't do it, the work that Richard's put in full justice, but ultimately we've got lots of managers who feel that the course delivers on what we try and do. It will help them moving forwards. It helps in those difficult conversations. It just gives those basic tips which build confidence and allow managers to tackle issues before they become too impactful and have to go down that formal route. So really tackling things, using the skills provided to help with future management issues. And ultimately, they like the context and the content, the format of the intervention as well. And lots of we have had people asking, why isn't all of our training like this? It's light touch. It's trying to give me the basics rather than trying to do everything at once. So we feel that support and encouragement is vital for completion. So we work very closely with organisations to make sure that managers are encouraged to go on the platform and that they complete so that they can really take on board all of the learning that's in the training. And although we're still in the kind of initial stages of the evaluation, we've got emerging impacts and that this does change people's conflict management confidence and their style. So it builds confidence and therefore gives them the opportunity and the confidence to actually engage with their staff and really change their style of management. So what's that? I think hopefully from what Richard and Paul have been saying, you've got a good idea of the offer. So we are looking to engage with organisations who think this looks like something that their managers will potentially benefit from, and we will give free training to all participating managers. Okay, so now I'll kind of talk a little bit about the research structure in a second. As Richard said, we are very keen to make sure that managers take the training and then have some support in terms of a toolkit, an interactive toolkit. So again, one of the offers here is that the managers that from your organisation who engage with the intervention will get 12 months free access to the interactive toolkit, which basically is a way for them to access the learning. And if they've got 5 minutes, they've got something that's really pared down. These are the basics. If they've got a little more time, they can go into more depth. Richard's mentioned the 15-minute one-to-one consultations, which has been a real kind of, we've got very positive feedback from those. And as the managers go through the training and complete, they get feedback on their own kind of approaches, how, in terms of the management, the conflict confidence questionnaire, thinking about, reflecting on how they personally do approach things. Are they collaborative? Do they avoid? And so on. In addition to the 12 months free access to the interactive toolkit, we are developing a skilled manager community, which all the managers who go through the training will be able to access, where they can share ideas with other managers and really build a community. Now, the last bit there is robust evaluation of impact of the training and engagement on performance, which I'll go through the details of in a second. But ultimately, the idea is to really help organisations to understand what their management competence level is at the start, how that changes as we carry out the intervention, and then to really reflect on their own kind of challenges, the challenges of their managers in their organisation, and for us to inform that and help and work with the organisation to tackle those issues. So just to give you an idea of what the ask is, so that's the offer. The ask is really, it's a straightforward or classic randomised control trial, which Paul and Richard mentioned at the start. Essentially, we start when organisations have flagged that they want to get involved. We'll interview key stakeholders to explore the context and the HR context. So how's the organisation doing? What kind of sector is it in? And so on. Just very broad brush, not lots of interviews, but just to get that context. And then we will work with the organisation, organisational diagrams and so on, to split the managers in the first instance into a group who get the intervention and a group who don't get the intervention. The idea is to figure out what is the impact of the training. That's the best way to do that. And that's the best way for us to help organisations understand how the training is having an impact. So essentially, we split the managers in your organisation into those who get and those who don't get the intervention, control group for the starters. We then take a benchmark across the entire organisation. Very light touch. The idea is not to have something that's really heavy. We've got a 10 question people survey, which forms an essential part of this benchmark. The idea is to keep this very light touch. We then train the group of managers over the course of the month. We then measure the impact. So looking again at thinking, how has that translated into impacts into their reports, the people who work for them. 3 to 5 months after initial training, we're a bit flexible on that. So, we realize organizations have their own processes and their own timelines for training. So we can work with you on that. And then for the second wave, that group who were the control group at first, the approach to training the control group differs according to the size of the organisation. The Research Council have been very generous, but we do have limited funding. So for larger organizations, we will talk to them about how we can train everybody. Just to reassure, there is an opportunity if you train half your managers and you think this is fantastic, there are lots of opportunities to train the other half of your managers in the skilled managers training. Then we'll report back. We provide a formal report back to the organisation to give you an idea of how this has translated into impact and how it has changed your managers' practice and how that's translated into their employees. So I think we'd like to paste in the questionnaire into the chat. Anybody? I can't see the chat, I'm afraid. So if you're interested in this, hopefully this has kind of emphasised just how what fantastic work Richard and colleagues have done. To express your interest, please complete the questionnaire by the 30th of June, which somebody's pasting in into the chat, the link, and also we've got QR code at the end here. We will be working with organisations to start the intervention around September to November 2022. So the idea is we will engage with you if you have interest, and then the idea is to start the training of that first wave of managers around there. We've got limitations on numbers, but as I said, we've got lots of ways of, if you're interested in the intervention and you don't make it into that first wave, there are lots of ways to engage. So we will get back to you in a couple of weeks if you answer the questionnaire and tell you how you can get involved. So if I leave the QR code up there, Fatima, I think you have been keeping an eye on chat and so on. So perhaps Richard and Paul, do you want to join me with your videos back on and we can answer some questions? And also Fatima, if you want to turn your video on and tell us some of the questions that are coming through for the Q&A.
Yes, I've been responding to some questions already, but I can read out a few for you to answer. So for example, one from Heather is, when we say the training is best for first line managers, do we mean people who haven't line managed before or people at the lower level line management within an organization?
So I think we're talking, hopefully from the presentation, you've got an idea of the skills are about people skills. So this is very much about individuals who are engaging on a day-to-day basis with staff. Richard, do you want to expand on my rather brief answer? Yeah,
no, originally, Heather, it was designed very much at first line managers. So people who are that first sort of, you know, who members of a team would go to with a particular problem or might be managing performance. So it's very much looking at first line managers, perhaps those with less experience. One of the interesting things in our testing is the organizations wanted to include more senior and slightly more experienced managers, which we did with some success. So I think that is something which we'd be happy to discuss with individual organizations. So we'd sit down with you, we'd look at who your managers are, what their experience levels are, and we decide which managers to include within the research. As Peter said, one of the things, and it's come up in the chat again, one of the things might well be for some organizations that we include a certain number of the managers in the research, but then we discuss with you about how we could roll that out to other groups of managers after the research was completed. So it was very much a discussion between us and you and us. One interesting thing was a lot of the first line managers who did the training in our pilot studies came back and said, we think you should be giving this to our managers. So there is certainly an appetite that it's not actually necessarily simply restricted to perhaps more junior or inexperienced managers.
Anything else, Fatima, that you?
Yes, maybe you can tell us a bit about two things actually. So optimal organization size, a few questions on that. And also about the access of the control group to the app and to the training.
Okay, so very much, one thing I didn't emphasize, when you answer the questionnaires, that they're quite open questions that we're asking, please do give us as much information as you can about your organization. In terms of the size of organization, we are honestly very keen to hear from the very smallest to the very largest. There is no limitation. We will then respond to you about how you could get involved, and how that will differ slightly according to the size of the organization, but there are opportunities for everybody. So I wouldn't want to kind of say we're looking for particular size of organizations. In terms of getting access for the half of managers who could constitute the control group in the first instance, this is something that we had questions of right at the start when we started engaging with organizations, was what if this works for that half of managers? Are we going to get the opportunity to train the other half? So we are piloting a commercial offer, which is discounted for those who are engaged in the research. So for those who kind of that second wave of managers really want to engage very quickly and kind of want to move outside the research, there's that opportunity. But for most organizations, we will train the second wave of managers for free. I don't want to commit too much to that, because obviously we've got a lot of interest and we've got a lot of people on the call. So we'll engage with each organization, but there will be an opportunity for that control group of managers, that group who forms the comparison group in the first instance, to obtain the training.
I think it would be fair to say, Pete, and I might be wrong here, but for most organizations, the treatment and control groups would be trained, and that would be for free. Yeah. And then the potential, if you then wanted to roll it out further to other groups of managers who haven't been involved in the research, that's something that we can discuss with you, and there may be a way of doing that to reduce cost, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you could tell us a bit about how we integrate the previous experiences of managers when allocating the training, or how we account for previous experiences of managers?
So the idea is that the allocation to the treatment control group is random. Okay, so the idea is that that's the kind of the experimental overview, is that ideally we've got, if we randomly allocate, we've got managers with different levels of experience in both camps, the treatment and control. But I'm not sure that's actually at the heart of the question. Richard, I mean, I guess in terms of answering that question.
Yeah, so one of the things we do is that we sit down with HR. It's normally HR representatives in the organisation, and potentially some senior manager or two, and we talk through what are the sorts of issues that are relevant in your organisation. So, for example, one of the organisations that we work with in our sort of piloting stage was a large organisation in healthcare. And so what we did was we talked about what are the issues that your managers struggle with, or what are the real problems, or what are the type of scenarios they deal with. And then we build those into the simulations, and we build those into the content in terms of the scenarios, the quiz questions, so that when managers get this, they're not just getting some generic issue, they're getting an issue the sort of issue that they're dealing with. In addition to that, I would stress that we have the one-to-one potential conversations, video coaching sessions, so that managers can as they're going through the training, can then come and talk to us and say, look, I've got this particular problem. This is an issue which I particularly struggle with. Have you got any advice? And so far in the pilotings, the managers who've used that facility have found that incredibly useful. And I had a conversation with a manager a couple of weeks ago where simply they were trying to get somebody back into the workplace after who'd been working from home, and they wanted to get the team back together a little bit, and they were really struggling having that conversation, found those conversations really difficult. And we spent 15 to 20 minutes talking through how they could approach that. And the feedback we got after that was that had been extremely useful. So there are ways in which we can tailor this a little bit, particularly with larger organizations, I have to say. But we can tailor this a little bit so that it actually fits some of the particular challenges that your managers are facing.
And just to kind of mention that, I'm not sure Richard mentioned it, but he was talking about linking to policies and practices within particular organisations. We're happy to bespoke like that. But also, we've been looking at the hospitality version, I think, Richard. You know, there's also, for instance, we've worked with healthcare trusts, and in those scenarios, people are in scrubs and so on. So, you know, the scenarios do also look like the experiences of the managers that in the sector that we're
and I've just noticed somebody's put in, will there be a charity version? I think, to be honest, it's a really good question, but if we had enough interest from a particular sector, then there is no problem that we can then build something in which then looks like, so far we have a generic version, we have a hospitality version, which the simulation, the quiz that you've taken part in was drawn from. And then we also have a healthcare version. And certainly if we have a large organization or enough people within a particular sector showing some real interest, then we're happy to do some extra work to try to make sure that we can bespoke it so that it actually speaks to your managers. One thing I should say, the actual structure of the training is as it is. Because it's a research project, we can't change that. So we can't just create an entirely new course, but what we can do is we can tweak it and refine it so that when your managers come on, they see something which is recognizable and that doesn't just look like something which is a generic training product.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. Do we want to pick up any more questions?
There were a couple of questions on what happens to access to the toolkit after 12 months. If there's a way to extend it, or what the options would be beyond 12 months.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea of the 12 months is because that's how the payments for the platform work. So organising, as I said, you know, part of the Research Council funding is the idea that this doesn't happen as a research project and then doesn't have a life afterwards. The idea is that we develop something, we learn how it impacts, and we make sure it has a life after this project. So all organisations we will be engaging with, and they will have the opportunity to look at extending beyond the 12 months. That's part of the pilot of the commercial offer, which is an output from the Research Council funding as well. Okay.
I just saw one question popped up, sorry Fatima, that I just thought might be useful to respond to now, because it's maybe a common question, is does this cover disciplinary and grievance procedures? So the training isn't specifically about process and procedure, because what we want managers to do is to intervene at an early point to avoid process and procedure. However, we understand that there are situations where those process procedures may need to be enacted. So the toolkit, for example, provides advice on how you deal with serious allegations. That provides a link through to further resources around discipline and grievance. And that's where we can bespoke it if you're a larger organization or we're doing a sector version, because we can then link that to your own organizational process and procedures. So a manager could be on their phone, say, I'm dealing with this issue, and you click a button and it goes straight through to the process and procedure, rather than having to try to, you know, dive onto your intranet and find a process, you know, your disciplinary procedure. So we can layer the intervention so that we touch on those issues and push and point managers in the right direction. But the intervention is very much about getting managers to resolve things informally and at an early stage wherever possible.
Okay. Any last questions or issues anybody would want to flag up? I think we're just about there. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, all participants, for coming along. Hopefully that has given you a good idea of the intervention, and you will go onto the questionnaire, register your interest, give us as much information as you can about your organisation. And as I say, we will get back to you in 2 weeks' time, and we hope to be engaging with you and your organisation in the near future.
If you haven't had your question answered at all, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be following up with you with some further information, a recording of this webinar, and also we'll try to put in a document of those questions, answering some of the questions that we perhaps didn't get time to get round to during the session. So hopefully look out for that. So that'll be on its way to in the next week.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks very much indeed, everybody. And thanks for your interest. Have a good day.